Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku's body aged backward every time he used his quirk. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The first thing to return was the pain. It wasn't a clean, sharp pain like a knife's cut, but a deep, grinding agony that seemed to emanate from the very marrow of his bones. It was a symphony of torment conducted in his arms, a choir of screaming nerves and splintered bone that sang of devastation. Izuku Midoriya drifted up from a black, dreamless sea, his consciousness snagging on the jagged reef of his own shattered body. He tried to move, to clench a fist, and the symphony erupted into a deafening crescendo. A guttural groan tore itself from his throat, raw and animalistic. His eyes fluttered open. The world was a sterile, blurry white. The smell of antiseptic stung his nostrils, a smell he was becoming grimly familiar with. A rhythmic, electronic beep echoed somewhere to his left, a steady metronome counting out the seconds of his survival. He was in a hospital. Again. Easy now, dearie. You gave us all quite the scare. The voice was soft, familiar, and laced with a weary sort of exasperation. Recovery Girl's face swam into focus above him. Her kind, wrinkled eyes held a deep-seated concern that transcended her professional duty. He could see the strain in the lines around her mouth. Our recovery. Girl, he rasped, his throat feeling like sandpaper. That's right, she said, adjusting his pillow with a practiced gentleness. You're at Central Hospital. Your friends brought you here after the incident. You've been unconscious for nearly a day. The incident. It came rushing back in a chaotic torrent of images and sensations. The smell of the forest, the suffocating pressure of Muscular's flesh quirk, the searing agony of pushing one for all past every conceivable limit. He remembered the desperate, soul-tearing roar of Delaware, Detroit, Smash! He remembered the feeling of his own body coming apart at the seams, a vessel no longer capable of containing the storm within. He remembered Koda, the terrified little boy with the water quirk. Had he saved him? Koda! Izuku choked out, trying to sit up. The movement sent a fresh wave of blinding pain through his arms, and he fell back with a choked cry. Both his arms were encased in thick, heavy plaster casts, suspended in slings. They felt less like parts of his body and more like alien objects chained to his torso. The boy is fine, Recovery Girl said, her voice firm, pushing him gently back down. Completely unharmed, thanks to you. You saved him, Izuku. You saved everyone at that camp. A wave of relief, so profound it was dizzying, washed over him. It was a small comfort, a single flickering candle in the vast, painful darkness of his current state. He had done it. He had been a hero. Now, Recovery Girl continued, her tone shifting to one of clinical severity. We need to talk about this. She tapped one of his casts. The doctors here were astounded. They said the damage was comparable to being caught in a localized building collapse. Both humeri were fractured in multiple places. The ulna and radius on both sides were practically pulverized. The ligaments were torn to shreds. Frankly, without my quirk, they were discussing amputation. Amputation? The word landed in the sterile room with the weight of a tombstone. Izuku's blood ran cold. He stared at the inert plaster shells that contained the ruins of his arms. He had known he was breaking himself, but he had never truly comprehended the precipice he was dancing on. But you can heal them? He asked, his voice small. I can't. She sighed, a sound heavy with years of mending reckless young heroes. But you know my quirk. It co-opts the body's own healing process and accelerates it exponentially. It requires stamina, energy, and Izuku, you have none. She wasn't wrong. Beneath the screaming pain, there was something else. A profound, cavernous exhaustion that went deeper than muscle or bone. It wasn't the simple tiredness that came after a hard day of training. This was a weariness of the soul, a cellular-level fatigue that left him feeling hollowed out, as if some fundamental part of him had been scooped away. I'll be okay, he insisted, trying to summon a reassuring smile that felt more like a grimace. I can handle it. Recovery Girl just looked at him, her gaze piercing. This can't continue, Izuku. What All Might passed on to you, it's a godlike power. But using it like this, treating your own body like a disposable bomb, you will destroy yourself. This is the last time I heal an injury this severe. The next time you come to me with arms like this, I will refuse. Understand? Your body won't be able to take it, and I won't be an accessory to your self-destruction. Her words were an ultimatum, as cold and hard as the plaster on his arms. He nodded, a lump forming in his throat. He understood. He had to get control. He had to. She leaned in, her lips soft and dry as they pressed against his forehead. The familiar warmth of her quirk flooded his system, but it was different this time. It was like trying to light a fire with damp kindling. The healing energy met a profound, unyielding resistance. It drained him instantly, pulling his consciousness back down towards the black, welcoming abyss. His last thought was that the exhaustion felt ancient, infinite, as if he had aged 1,000 years in the fight for his life. 2 days later the casts were off. His arms were weak, riddled with the dull ache of accelerated mending, but they were whole. He spent another day under observation before the doctors, shaking their heads in disbelief at his recovery speed, finally discharged him. The atmosphere at UA was a strange mix of somber and relieved. The move into the New Heights Alliance dormitory system was underway, a measure to ensure the students' safety, a constant, physical reminder of the attack that had put him here. His friends swarmed him the moment he stepped through the doors of the newly minted Class 1A dorm building. Midoriya! You're all right. Ida's voice boomed, his hands chopping the air with his usual rigid precision, though his eyes were soft with genuine relief. Deku-kun! Uraraka floated towards him, her expression a mixture of joy and worry. We were so worried! Your arms, they're okay, Izuku said, managing a more convincing smile this time. He held them up, wiggling his fingers. See? Good as new. Almost. The common room was abuzz with activity. Boxes were still being unpacked, furniture was being arranged, and a sense of communal, chaotic energy filled the space. It was a new beginning, a fortress against the growing darkness outside. For a few hours, surrounded by the warmth and chatter of his friends, Izuku almost felt normal. He let their energy wash over him, a welcome balm on his frayed nerves. The first hint that something was fundamentally wrong came later that evening, when he was unpacking his own things in his new All Might-themed room. He pulled his UA uniform from a box, the familiar gray blazer and dark teal trousers. He'd need it for classes tomorrow. He slipped on the blazer out of habit, and it felt off. The shoulders seemed a little too broad, the sleeves hanging just a fraction of an inch longer than he remembered. He frowned, tugging at the cuffs. Must have lost some weight in the hospital, he reasoned. Muscle mass, probably. I was out for a while and couldn't eat much. It was a perfectly logical explanation. He dismissed the thought and continued unpacking, arranging his extensive collection of All Might figures on his new shelves. Later, as he was changing into his pajamas, he bumped his knee against the corner of his bed frame. He winced, rubbing the spot. His eyes fell to his kneecap, and he froze. There was a scar that was supposed to be there. It wasn't a large scar, just a pale, silvery crescent moon on the side of his left knee. He'd gotten it when he was 6, falling off his bike while trying to imitate an All Might-inspired jump. He remembered the sting, the blood, and his mother's gentle hands cleaning the wound. It had been a part of him for a decade, a tiny landmark on the map of his own body, and it was gone. The skin was smooth, unblemished, as if the fall had never happened. He stared, his heart beginning to thud a slow, heavy rhythm against his ribs. He ran his fingertips over the spot. Nothing. Recovery girl's quirk, his mind supplied, scrambling for a rational foothold. It's incredible. It must be so powerful that it doesn't just heal new wounds, it must have reverted the old scar tissue back to its original state. Yeah, that has to be it. It made sense. It was a testament to her power, nothing more. A weird side effect, sure, but nothing to worry about. He forced himself to believe it, pushing down the cold knot of dread that was beginning to form in the pit of his stomach. But the feeling of hollowness, the deep, cellular exhaustion, had never truly left him. It was a low hum beneath the surface of his thoughts, a constant reminder of the price he had paid in that forest. He was just stressed. traumatized even. It was normal to feel strange after what he'd been through. He just needed to rest, to get back into the rhythm of school and training. Everything would go back to normal. It had to. A week passed. The new dorm life settled into a routine. Izuku's arms regained most of their strength, and he felt a desperate, gnawing need to train, to prove to himself and to Recovery Girl that he could control his power. The memory of her ultimatum was a constant, chilling presence. All Might found him in one of the campus's smaller training facilities, Training Ground Gamma, a sprawling labyrinth of pipes and industrial structures. He was going through his shoot-style kicks, the movements still a bit stiff. "Young Midoriya!" All Might's voice, even in his skeletal form, still carried an echo of its former boom. He was holding 2 water bottles, a small smile on his face. "All Might!" Izuku stopped, breathing heavily, sweat beading on his forehead. "I'm glad to see you're taking your new focus seriously," All Might said, handing him a bottle. "But remember what we discussed. Controlled output. Small percentages. We need to build your body up to be a proper vessel, not tear it down." "I know," Izuku said, his voice earnest. "That's why I'm here. I need to feel it again. Just a little bit. To make sure I can keep it small." All Might's expression softened with understanding. He knew the siren song of One for All, the intoxicating rush of its power. He also knew the fear that came with it. "All right. A simple test then. Let's see a 5% Detroit smash. Not on anything that will fight back. Just that reinforced pillar over there. Focus on the feeling, on containing the energy, not on the destruction." Izuku nodded, his heart hammering. This was it. His first time willingly calling on the power since the muscular fight. He took a deep breath, trying to push away the memory of splintering bone and the phantom exhaustion that still clung to him. He faced the thick plasteel pillar, its surface scarred from countless other training sessions. He planted his feet, just as All Might had taught him. He focused, visualizing the power not as a roaring explosion, but as a crackling stream. He felt the familiar energy course through him, a circuit completing. Red veins of power spiderwebbed across his skin, and green lightning, thin and controlled, flickered around his fist. 5%, he whispered, concentrating every fiber of his being on that number, that limit. He swung. The punch connected with a solid, satisfying thwack. A spiderweb of hairline cracks appeared on the pillar's surface. It was a good hit. Controlled. Powerful, but not self-destructive. A success. But then it happened. For a single, terrifying instant, the world went sideways. It wasn't just dizziness. It was a profound, nauseating lurch in his very soul, a sensation of being violently pulled backward through an invisible dimension. The sounds of the training ground warped and stretched, his own heartbeat seeming to echo from a great distance. It was like vertigo mixed with déjà vu, a sickening slip in the fabric of his own existence. And just as quickly as it came, it was gone. He stumbled back, gasping, one hand flying to his head. The world snapped back into sharp focus. "Whoa there!" All Might was by his side in an instant, his thin hand on Izuku's shoulder, steadying him. "Are you all right, my boy?" "You're as pale as a ghost." "I am fine," Izuku stammered, his mind racing to process the bizarre sensation. Just a little dizzy. I guess I'm still not at 100% after the hospital." All Might looked him over, his brow furrowed with concern. "Perhaps that's enough for today. You've proven you can control the output. That's a victory. Now you need to focus on rest and recovery. Don't push it." Izuku nodded numbly, his heart still rabbiting in his chest. He let All Might lead him out of the training ground, the strange, disorienting feeling still echoing in his senses. He tried to rationalize it away. A head rush. A side effect of his medication. A lingering neurological symptom from the trauma. Anything but what it felt like. It felt like he had lost something. Back in the safety of his room, the feeling of wrongness was more intense than ever. He felt agitated, restless. He splashed cold water on his face, trying to clear his head, and looked up into the mirror above his sink. He stared. He had been staring at his own face every day for 16 years. He knew its landscape intimately, the spray of freckles across his cheeks, The determined set of his jaw that had slowly sharpened over the past year, the faint lines of stress and exhaustion around his eyes that were the price of admission to UA. But the face staring back at him now was subtly different. The jawline seemed softer, less defined. The look in his eyes was still his, but the face they were set in felt younger. The hard-won maturity that had been etched there by the USJ incident, by the Hosu fight, by the final exams, seemed to have been smoothed over. He looked less like a 16-year-old battle-tested hero in training and more like the 15-year-old boy who had first nervously walked through the gates of UA. A cold, visceral fear, unlike anything he had ever felt, began to creep up his spine. It was a primal, instinctual terror that whispered a truth his rational mind refused to accept. "It's just your imagination," he told himself, his reflection mouthing the words back at him. "You're tired. You're paranoid." But he couldn't shake the image of the vanished scar. He couldn't forget the feeling of the too loose uniform. And he couldn't ignore the sickening lurch he'd felt when he used his quirk. These weren't separate, unrelated incidents. They were data points. And they were all pointing to an impossible, horrifying conclusion. He needed proof. Something objective. Something that his mind couldn't twist or rationalize away. His eyes darted around the room, landing on a faint pencil mark on the wall near his closet. A wave of memory washed over him. About a month ago, just after moving into the dorms, he and Ida had been joking around. Ida, ever meticulous, had suggested they mark their heights to track their physical development over their time at UA. It had been a fun, silly moment. Ida had stood ramrod straight while Izuka marked his height, and then they had switched. A single, sharp pencil line marked I am Izuka Midoriya. His breath hitched. That was it. That was the proof. His movements felt stiff and robotic, as if he were a puppet being controlled by his own mounting dread. He found a ruler in his desk drawer, his hand trembling so badly he almost dropped it. He went to the wall, his heart feeling like a trapped bird beating against his ribs. He stood with his back flat against the wall, just as he had a month ago. He held his breath, trying to stand as straight as possible, his heels together. He reached up with the ruler, holding it level on top of his head, the cold plastic pressing into his scalp. With his other hand, he fumbled for a pencil. His fingers were clumsy, slick with a cold sweat. He made a new mark on the wall, a small, horizontal line. For a long moment, he didn't move. He just stood there, his eyes squeezed shut, praying. Praying that he was wrong. Praying that he was losing his mind. Praying for any explanation other than the one that was solidifying in his gut like a block of ice. Finally, he stepped away from the wall. He looked. The original mark, labeled I am, was clear and distinct. And his new mark, the one he had just made, was below it. It wasn't a huge gap. Not an inch. Not even a full centimeter. But it was there. A small, undeniable, impossible space between where he had been and where he was now. He stared at the two lines, the physical representation of a broken law of nature. People didn't shrink. The carefully constructed walls of his denial didn't just crack, they exploded. The exhaustion. The loose uniform. The vanished scar from his childhood. The dizzying, backward-falling sensation when he used one for all. The younger face in the mirror. And now this. The proof. It all clicked into place, forming a picture of such profound horror that the air was stolen from his lungs. He stumbled backward, his legs giving out from under him, and collapsed onto the floor. A ragged, desperate gasp escaped his lips, sounding more like a sob. It wasn't a bomb. It wasn't just breaking his bones. One for all was a fire, and his own life, his own physical existence, was the fuel. The muscular fight, where he had burned through 1,000,000% of a power he didn't understand, hadn't just cost him the integrity of his limbs. It had cost him time. It had burned away a year of his physical age, reverting him to the boy he was before. And the 5% smash he'd just thrown? That had been another small log on the fire, chipping away another day, another hour, another piece of himself. The panic was a physical thing now, a clawing beast in his chest. His dream. His promise to All Might. To become the next symbol of peace. Every punch he threw, every heroic act he performed, every time he called upon the power that was supposed to be his salvation, it was actively, physically erasing him. Each battle wasn't just bringing him closer to victory. It was bringing him closer to disappearing. Closer to being a child again. And then, what? A toddler? An infant? A ghost of a memory? Izuku Midoriya curled into a ball on the floor of his brand new room, surrounded by the smiling face of his lifelong hero, and for the first time, he was truly, utterly terrified of his own quirk. The world had become a landscape of tiny, terrifying measurements. A week had passed since the horrifying revelation in front of his wall. A week in which Izuku Midoriya had lived not as a hero in training, but as a prisoner of his own body, a secret agent tasked with cataloging his own slow-motion disappearance. Sleep offered little respite, haunted by dreams of falling backward through an endless, starless void. Waking was worse. Waking was real. His morning routine, once a simple matter of getting dressed and brushing his teeth, had transformed into a painful, obsessive ritual. The first test was the shirt. He'd taken to exclusively wearing one of his older, slightly smaller All Might t-shirts to bed. Each morning, he'd pull it on and gauge the fit. Was there more slack in the shoulders? Did the hem fall a fraction lower on his waist than it did yesterday? The answer was always an ambiguous, gut-wrenching maybe. Then came the mirror. He'd stand there, his mind a maelstrom of frantic analysis, trying to apply his formidable intellect to the impossible task of detecting daily, microscopic changes in his own face. He'd traced the line of his jaw with a trembling finger. Was it softer today? Did his eyes look wider, more naive? He saw the face of a younger boy staring back, a boy from before the League of Villains, before the hero killer, before Muscular. A boy who hadn't yet paid the toll. The reflection seemed to mock him, its youth a testament to his slow erasure. The final, most damning ritual was the height chart. He couldn't bring himself to do it every day. The terror was too great. But every 2 or 3 days, in the dead of night when the dorm was silent, he would repeat the process. He'd stand ramrod straight, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs, and make a new, faint pencil mark. Each time, the new line was infinitesimally lower than the last. The wall was becoming a timeline of his own regression, a graphic representation of his dwindling future. This pervasive fear bled into every corner of his life. In the classroom, he found it impossible to focus. Mr. Ectoplasm's lecture on advanced mathematics faded into a meaningless drone. Instead of taking notes on quadratic functions, Izuku found himself scrawling frantic, secret calculations in the margins of his notebook. Muscular fight, 1,000,000% smash equals, training, 5% smash equals. He tried to create a formula, a terrible equation to define his own decay. Power output multiplied by duration. Was it exponential? He had no data, only the horrifying results. A 5% smash, a flicker of power lasting less than a second, had cost him a measurable fraction of a centimeter, and that dizzying sense of vertigo. He estimated it had to be a few days, maybe even a week of his physical age, gone in an instant. The muscular fight, where he'd unleashed a cataclysmic, body-destroying torrent of power, the thought made him feel sick. A year? More? The numbers were too big, too terrifying to contemplate. Midoriya, the voice cut through his panic trance like a knife. He flinched, snapping his head up. Shota Aizawa was staring directly at him from the front of the classroom, his gaze flat and unnervingly perceptive. The entire class was now looking at him. "Is my lecture boring you?" Aizawa asked, his tone devoid of emotion but carrying an undercurrent of something sharp. "And no, Aizawa-sensei. Not at all," Izuku stammered, slamming his notebook shut. His face burned with shame. Aizawa's eyes narrowed slightly. He didn't press the issue, simply turning back to the board. "Pay attention. This will be on your next exam." But Izuku felt the weight of his teacher's gaze for the rest of the period. Aizawa was no fool. He was a man who survived by observing, by noticing the smallest tells, the slightest deviations from the norm. And Izuku Midoriya was currently one massive, walking deviation. The true test, the arena of his new private hell, was practical training. Heroics class had become a source of profound anxiety. Today's exercise was a search and rescue simulation in the collapsed zone, a sprawling ruin of crumbling concrete and twisted rebar. The objective was to navigate the treacherous terrain, locate hidden rescue dummies, and extract them within a time limit. It was an exercise that demanded speed, strength, and strategic thinking. It was an exercise he should have excelled at. He was teamed with Bakugo, Kirishima, and Ishido. A powerhouse team. At least, it should have been. Alright, losers, here's the plan. Bakugo snarled, jabbing a finger at a holographic map of the area. Deku, you're on recon. Your speed should let you cover the most ground. Kirishima, you're on debris clearing with me. Pinky, you use your acid to melt through any rebar we can't bust. We find the targets, we grab them, we win. Got it? It was a sound plan. The old Izuku, the Izuku from 2 weeks ago, would have nodded eagerly and shot off like a green blur, using one for all, full cowling to bounce from wall to wall, his mind already mapping the fastest routes. This Izuku just swallowed hard and nodded, his stomach twisting into a cold knot. Speed. That required full cowling. That required using his quirk. Yeah, got it, Kaken, he mumbled. As soon as the buzzer sounded, the difference was stark. Bakugo and Kirishima charged forward, a whirlwind of explosions and hardened flesh. Ishido skated ahead on a slick of acid. Izuku ran. He just ran, his legs pumping as hard as they could, relying on pure, unaugmented muscle. He was fast by normal standards, but in this world of gods and monsters, he was a snail. He could hear Bakugo's explosions echoing ahead, a constant, angry reminder of how far behind he was falling. He came to a wide chasm, a gap maybe 10 meters across that he would have cleared in a single bound with a 5% leap. Now, it looked like the Grand Canyon. He skidded to a halt at the edge, his breath catching in his throat. He could try to climb down and up the other side, but that would waste precious minutes. He needed to jump. But how? Without his quirk, it was impossible. Just a little, a desperate voice in his head pleaded. Just 1%. You have to. You're holding them back. The fear of failure warred with the terror of his quirk. The image of the pencil marks on his wall flashed in his mind. He gritted his teeth, his body trembling with indecision. He backed up, took a running start, and leaped. He didn't even make it halfway. His feet slammed into the concrete face of the chasm several meters below the opposite ledge, the impact jarring his teeth. He clung on by his fingertips, his muscles screaming, loose rubble skittering into the darkness below. He scrambled, his sneakers finding no purchase on the sheer wall. He was stuck. Humiliated. DKU! What the hell are you doing? Bakugo's voice was a roar from the other side. He was staring down at him, his red eyes burning with a mixture of fury and genuine disbelief. Are you playing games? Jump, you idiot! I can't! Izuku grunted, his fingers slipping. With a disgusted snarl, Bakugo aimed a palm downward. Fine. Be useless! An explosion erupted from his hand, not aimed at Izuku, but angled to propel himself across the chasm. He landed on Izuku's side, grabbed him by the collar of his uniform, and hauled him up with infuriating ease. He slammed Izuku against the wall, his face inches away. The smell of nitroglycerin and ozone filled Izuku's nostrils. What is your problem? Bakugo growled, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. You've been acting like a goddamn ghost for a week. You're slow, you're weak, you're hesitating. It's pathetic. I'm just being careful, Kaken. Izuku lied, his voice thin. Recovery girl said, Don't you dare hide behind that old lady. Bakugo shoved him back. I was there. I saw what you did to that muscle freak. You were a monster. And now you can't even jump across a ditch? Get your head out of your ass and fight. He stormed off, leaving Izuku leaning against the wall, shaking. The rest of the exercise was a blur of failure. He was too slow to reach the dummies. He lacked the strength to lift a concrete slab off one of the targets, forcing Kirishima to double back and do it for him. He was a liability, a dead weight on his team. They failed the exercise, missing the time limit by over a minute. The walk back to the observation room was silent and heavy. Kirishima kept shooting him worried glances, the picture of manly concern. Ishido just looked disappointed. But Bakugo's silence was the worst. It was a cold, simmering silence that promised a later, more violent eruption. He didn't have to wait long. After changing out of his dirt-stained gym uniform, a uniform that, he noted with a fresh wave of nausea, felt even looser than it had that first day, he was heading back to the main building when a hand clamped down on his shoulder like a vice. He was spun around and slammed against the cool concrete of the hallway wall. It was Bakugo. Of course, it was Bakugo. His usual explosive rage was gone, replaced by a cold, frightening intensity. His crimson eyes scanned Izuku from head to toe, analytical and sharp. "We're going to have a talk, Deku," Bakugo said, his voice dangerously low. "Keikaken, I'm sorry about the exercise." "Shut up. I don't care about the stupid exercise." He cut him off, his grip tightening. "I care about what's wrong with you. You've been off since the training camp. You're jumpy. You're quiet, and..." He leaned in closer, his eyes narrowing. "You look different." Izuku's blood turned to ice. "I don't know what you're talking about. Don't lie to me," Bakugo snarled, his patience finally snapping. "I've known you my entire damn life. I've watched you go from a worthless pebble to this. I know what you look like, and right now you look like you did last year. You look younger. Weaker." He let go of Izuku's shoulder, only to poke him hard in the chest. "And you're shorter. I'm sure of it." The observation was so impossibly accurate, so far beyond what anyone else had noticed, that Izuku's carefully constructed defenses crumbled. He couldn't form a response. His mind was a blank wall of sheer panic. Bakugo saw the terror in his eyes, and something clicked behind his own. The anger in his expression shifted, morphing into a dawning, horrified comprehension. "It's the quirk, isn't it?" he whispered, the words stark in the empty hallway. "The one you got from All Might. Every time you use it, it's doing something to you." He took a step back, his gaze sweeping over Izuku's frame again, this time with a new, dreadful understanding. "You're getting weaker, Deku," he repeated, but the accusation was gone, replaced by a raw statement of fact. Then he said the single word that confirmed Izuku's deepest, most secret fear. "What the hell is your problem? You look like you're shrinking." The word hung in the air between them, a death sentence. Shrinking. He'd said it. He knew. Izuku couldn't speak. He couldn't breathe. He could only stare at his childhood rival, his face a mask of naked fear. His silence was a confession, louder than any words could ever be. Bakugo stared at him for a long, tense moment. He opened his mouth as if to say something else, then closed it, shaking his head with a look of disgusted disbelief. Without another word, he turned and stalked away, his shoulders rigid. He didn't look back. Izuku slid down the wall, his legs no longer able to support him. He pulled his knees to his chest, wrapping his arms around them, trying to make himself as small as possible. The secret was out, and the boy who had discovered it was the one person he could never fool. That night, sleep was not an option. Izuku locked himself in his room, the All Might posters on his walls feeling like silent, accusing sentinels. Bakugo's word echoed in his mind. Shrinking. 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 He couldn't run from it anymore. He needed to know. He needed to face the full, horrifying scope of his condition. He pulled out his most detailed hero analysis notebook, number 13, and a fresh pen. He turned to a clean page and, with a hand that trembled so violently he could barely form the letters, wrote the title, One for All, the Cost Analysis. His mind, once a tool for deconstructing the quirks of heroes and villains, was now turned inward in a gruesome act of self-dissection. He had to quantify the unquantifiable. He had to put a number on his own erasure. He started with what he knew. Training ground gamma, 1 week ago won by 5% Detroit smash. Duration, 1 second. Estimated physical age cost, 3-5 days. He based this on the height loss and the intensity of the vertigo. It was a wild guess, but it felt sickeningly plausible. He worked backward from there. His entire history with One for All, final exams versus All Might, multiple 5% jumps and movements. One uncontrolled 100% smash, targeted, not self-destructive. He remembered the desperate charge, the punch to All Might's face. He hadn't broken his arm that time. It was more controlled. Estimated cost, 2 months. He scribbled the number down, his stomach churning. 2 months of his life, burned away to pass an exam. Hero killer stain fight, multiple 5% full cowling uses. Several high-output smashes resulted in leg damage. The memories were a painful blur of alleyways and blood. This was sustained. Higher cost. Maybe 4 to 6 months? Sports Festival vs. Todoroki, the finger flicks. 8 100% smashes. Resulted in mangled fingers. Then the final, catastrophic punch. His hand began to ache with phantom pain as he wrote. Each flick must have cost something. A day? A few hours? The final punch, that was like muscular, but less focused. It shattered my arm. Another 6 months? 8, the numbers were piling up. Months were turning into years. He was 16 years and a few months old, chronologically. But physically, he came to the beginning. The entrance exam. The 0-pointer. The first time he had ever used one for all in a true smash. The punch that had saved Uraraka and shattered 3 of his limbs. Entrance exam versus 0-pointer. 100% smash. Extreme recoil damage. He remembered the feeling of the power, pure and untamed, a supernova in his limb. Cost, at least 3 months. He sat back, his breathing ragged. He added up the crude, horrifying estimates. 3 months for the robot. Maybe 8 for the sports festival. 6 for stain. 2 for the final exam. He was already looking at a year and a half of his life, just gone. Wiped from his physical ledger. And then there was the big one. The monster in the forest. Muscular fight, multiple 100% smashes. 1,000,000% Delaware-Detroit smash. The number itself was absurd, a desperate scream made manifest. It wasn't a real percentage, but a representation of pushing beyond every known limit. It was the moment he shoveled a vast, terrifying amount of fuel into the fire. The result had been catastrophic damage, but he'd won. He'd saved Kota. What was the price for a miracle? He remembered the profound, soul-deep exhaustion. The feeling of being hollowed out. It was so much more intense than any other injury. It had to be. Estimated cost, 1 full year. Maybe more. He dropped the pen. It clattered onto the desk. He added the new number to his grim tally. 1 year and a half, plus another year. That was 2.5 years. He was 16. Chronologically, he did the math. 16 minus 2.5. He was physically 13.5 years old. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. He wasn't just imagining it. He wasn't just a bit shorter. He was, in every physical sense, a middle schooler. A child. A 13-year-old boy trapped in a 16-year-old's life, with a 16-year-old's memories and mind. The dissonance was so profound it made him want to vomit. His dream, his life's singular ambition, was a countdown timer to his own oblivion. The path to becoming the #1 hero was a path that led directly back to the crib. Each victory, each person he saved, would steal another piece of him until there was nothing left but a child, and then a toddler, and then... He couldn't bear to think about it. His exhausted mind, frayed by fear and lack of sleep, finally gave out. He slumped forward, his head resting on his arms on the desk, his terrible calculations lying starkly on the page before him. He slipped into a feverish, haunted sleep, and the nightmare began. He was standing in a ruined city, the sky a bruised purple. Dust and smoke choked the air. Before him stood the monster from his predecessor's memories, the boogeyman of the hero world, all for one. The man wore a formal suit, but his face was a grotesque mask of scar tissue, tubes and pipes breathing for him. He had no eyes, but Izuku felt his gaze, ancient and malevolent. "So you are the 9th?" All for One's voice echoed, not through the air, but directly in his mind. "Another foolish child, eager to burn himself out for a worthless cause." Izuku grit his teeth, the green lightning of full cowling enveloping him. "I will stop you!" he yelled, his voice sounding thin and reedy in the oppressive silence. He charged. He threw a punch, aiming for the center of the monster's chest. Detroit smash! The impact was immense. But as his fist connected, he felt that sickening backward lurch, 100 times more intense than ever before. He looked down at his hand. It was smaller. The knuckles less defined. The arm it was attached to was thinner. An interesting quirk you've developed there, Ninth. All for One mused, completely unfazed by the blow. A self-consuming flame. How beautifully ironic. My brother's power, designed to be passed on, is now eating its host from the inside out. A little parting gift I left in its code generations ago, waiting for a vessel powerful enough to activate it. Izuku stared in horror. This wasn't a mutation. It was a curse. A trap. He screamed in defiance and attacked again, a flurry of kicks and punches. Shoot style. 100%. Each impact, each burst of green energy, sent the same wave of nauseating vertigo through him. With every blow he landed, he shrank. His Yui uniform became a baggy costume. His legs grew shorter, his strides less powerful. His arms thinned, the muscles vanishing. He was 14. Then 13. He looked down and saw he was wearing his old middle school Gakurin uniform. Still fighting? All for One chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. The embers still glow, I see. He didn't stop. He couldn't. He had to save people. He had to be a hero. He punched again, and again. He was 12. 11. 10. A small child in oversized clothes, flailing uselessly against an unmovable object. His friends appeared at the edges of the ruined street. Uraraka. Ida. Todoroki. Bakugo. They were watching him, their faces not filled with hope, but with a terrible, unbearable pity. Look at him! All for One said, his voice a triumphant boom. This is your symbol of peace? This is the inheritor of One for All? He is not a hero. He is a memory, fading in reverse. Izuku launched one final, desperate attack. He was a child of 7, maybe 6, tears streaming down his face. His punch had no force. It bounced harmlessly off the villain's suit. He looked at his hands. They were tiny, pudgy, powerless. He was the same quirkless, defenseless boy who had watched the All Might video all those years ago. All for One knelt down, his terrifying, featureless face looming over him. It's over, little one. You have nothing left to burn. Izuku Midori awoke with a silent scream, his body drenched in a cold sweat. He was tangled in his sheets, his heart hammering against his ribs like it wanted to break free. The nightmare clung to him, its vivid terror more real than the All Might posters on his wall. He scrambled out of bed and flicked on the light, his breath coming in ragged, panicked gasps. He ran to the mirror, his eyes wide with fear. The face that stared back was the face from his nightmare. Younger. So much younger. The face of a child. His secret was a ticking time bomb. And in the dead of night, alone in his room, Izuku finally understood. He wasn't just in a race to become the greatest hero. He was in a race against his own body. A race he was losing with every heroic impulse, with every beat of his own courageous, self-destructive heart. The nightmare hadn't ended when he woke up. It had simply changed venues, moving from the ruined city of his subconscious to the sterile, all-might-themed cage of his dorm room. Izuku hadn't slept again. He'd spent the pre-dawn hours sitting on the edge of his bed, staring at his hands, which seemed to belong to a stranger, a younger, weaker stranger. The frantic calculations from his notebook were seared onto the inside of his eyelids. Physically 13.5. The number was a brand on his soul. He felt a terrifying clarity, the kind that comes from pure, undiluted fear. The weight of his secret was no longer a burden he could carry. It was a physical thing, a block of granite crushing his chest, making each breath a conscious, labored effort. He couldn't tell his friends. The pity in their eyes would break him. He couldn't tell his mother. The truth would destroy her. There was only one person. The one who had started it all. The one who had given him this power, this dream, this curse. All Might. He had to tell All Might. With the first hint of gray light filtering through his window, Izuku moved. His actions were jerky, marionette-like, driven by a desperate compulsion. He pulled on his Yui uniform. The blazer hung on his frame like a coat on a scarecrow, the sleeves dangling over his knuckles. The trousers pulled around his ankles. He didn't bother to fix them. He didn't have the energy. The ill-fitting clothes were part of the truth now, a piece of evidence he couldn't hide. He made his way to the common room. The dorm was hushed, the air still and cool with the lingering quiet of the night. He sank onto one of the sofas, his small frame looking lost in its plush cushions. He didn't know what he was waiting for, or what he would say. He just knew he couldn't be alone with this knowledge for another second. He stared at the blank television screen, his own ghostly, diminished reflection staring back. He didn't have to wait long. A soft shuffling sound announced the arrival of another early riser. Tashinori Yagi, looking more skeletal and weary than ever in a simple tracksuit, entered the common room, heading for the kitchen. He stopped dead when he saw Izuku. "Young Midoriya?" His voice was raspy with sleep. "What are you doing up so early? You look exhausted." Tashinori's eyes, deep-set and shadowed, swept over him. He wasn't a fool. He was All Might, a man who had spent a lifetime reading people, assessing threats, and seeing the truth behind the masks. He took in the boy's pale, sweat-slicked face, the dark circles under his eyes, the way his uniform engulfed his shrunken frame. A frown of deep concern etched itself onto his gaunt features. "Is everything all right?" he asked, his voice softening. He abandoned his quest for coffee and came to sit in the armchair opposite the sofa, leaning forward with his elbows on his bony knees. "You've been distant since the training camp. Your performance in class has been slipping. Aizawa has mentioned it. I've seen it myself. If something is wrong, you must tell me. The burden of one for all is not one you have to bear alone." That was it. That was the key. The kindness. The genuine, paternal concern in his hero's eyes was the one thing his strained composure couldn't withstand. It was the gentle tap on the dam wall that unleashed the flood. A choked, ragged sound tore itself from Izuku's throat. It wasn't a word, just a pure, animal noise of pain. His vision blurred as his eyes filled with hot, traitorous tears. He tried to speak, to form the words, but his throat closed up. "My boy!" All Might's concern deepened into alarm. He moved from the chair to the sofa, sitting beside Izuku, his presence a strange mixture of frail and immensely powerful. "Izuku, what is it? Talk to me, Izuku gasped, his breath hitching in a series of desperate, shallow pants. The words were a logjam in his throat. He couldn't say it. He had to show him. With a sudden, frantic movement, he lurched to his feet. He grabbed All Might's thin wrist, his grip surprisingly strong. "Come on," he choked out, the words barely audible. You have to see." Confused but alarmed by his protégé's raw panic, All Might allowed himself to be pulled along. Izuku practically dragged him through the silent dorm, his bare feet slapping against the cold floor. He fumbled with the handle to his room, his hand shaking so violently it took him 3 tries to open the door. He tugged All Might inside, into the shrine of his own shattered dream, and pointed a trembling finger at the wall by his closet. At the pencil marks. "What?" All Might began, his gaze following Izuku's finger. He saw the 2 lines. The top one, neat and precise, labeled "I am." And the second one, slightly below it. He frowned, not understanding. "That was a month ago," Izuku whispered, his voice cracking. He gestured to the top line. "Ida, we were measuring our heights." He then pointed to the lower line. This was a week ago." All Might stared at the 2 marks, the small but undeniable space between them. A flicker of confusion crossed his face, followed by a dawning unease. "You must have marked it wrong, my boy, or perhaps you were slouching." "No!" Izuku's voice rose, bordering on hysterical. He backed up against the wall himself, standing ramrod straight, and pointed to the top of his own head. The green curls didn't even reach the second mark now. They were a full centimeter below it. "Look! Just look!" The truth of it, the visual, impossible evidence, finally slammed into Tashinori. His breath hitched. The air in the room grew cold and heavy. "And this?" Izuku continued, his confession now a torrent. He pulled up the leg of his oversized trousers and pointed to his smooth, unblemished knee. "There was a scar here. I got it when I was 6. It's been there my whole life. After Recovery Girl healed me, it was gone. I thought it was her quirk, but it wasn't. It wasn't healed. It was undone." He finally looked up, his tear-filled green eyes meeting All Might's horrified blue ones. "It's the quirk," Izuku finally sobbed, the words tumbling out in a rush of despair. "Every time I use it. Every smash, every jump. It's not just breaking my bones anymore. It's eating me, it's taking my time. The muscular fight, it cost me a year, All Might. A whole year. The 5% smash in training cost me days. I did the math. I'm not 16 anymore. My body, it's 13. I'm shrinking, All Might. I'm disappearing." The full, catastrophic weight of the confession landed in the small room, sucking all the air out. Tashinori stared at the boy, the child, before him, and a horror unlike any he had ever known washed over him. It was a cold, sickening wave of guilt that was so profound it made him feel dizzy. He saw it all now. The baggy clothes. The younger-looking face. The drop in physical performance. It wasn't a slump. It wasn't trauma. It was erasure. He, Tashinori Yagi, the symbol of peace, had passed on his sacred trust, the torch of generations, and it had turned into a cursed flame that was consuming his successor alive. He had looked at this bright, heroic boy, a boy who had already suffered so much for being quirkless, and he had handed him a death sentence wrapped in a dream. "No!" All Might whispered, the word a hollow prayer. He stumbled back, his hand going to his mouth, his eyes wide with a terror that mirrored Izuku's own. "No, it can't be." He looked from the marks on the wall to the child swimming in his uniform. The guilt was a physical entity, a shard of ice in his damaged lung. He had done this. "I did this to him. We're going to Recovery Girl," he said, his voice suddenly hard, flinty with a desperate need for action. It was the only way he knew how to fight the overwhelming wave of self-loathing. Now, the walk to Recovery Girl's office was the longest of Izuku's life. The early morning sun was casting long shadows across the UA campus, but neither of them noticed the beauty of the dawn. All Might, in his skeletal form, strode ahead with a grim, frantic energy, his long legs eating up the ground. Izuku had to half-jog to keep up, the swishing of his too long trousers a constant, humiliating reminder of his condition. The silence between them was a screaming void, filled with unspoken horror and regret. All Might's mind was a whirlwind of self-recrimination. Why didn't I see it? Why didn't the other vestiges warn me? Is this what happened to Nana? No, her death was at the hands of All for One. This is new. This is something else. He felt a rage building within him, a rage at the quirk, at fate, and most of all, at himself. They found Recovery Girl already in her office, organizing medical files. She looked up as they burst in, raising an eyebrow at their disheveled, panicked appearances. "Goodness, what's happened now?" she asked, her tone weary. "Don't tell me you've broken something already, Izuku." "It's worse," All Might said, his voice strained. Much worse. For the second time that morning, the terrible story was told. Izuku, now numb and detached, recited the facts with a chilling calmness: the vanishing scar, the height marks, the vertigo, the horrifying calculations. All Might paced the small office like a caged lion, his fists clenching and unclenching, interjecting with his own horrified observations. Recovery Girl listened, her expression growing progressively graver. She sat Izuku down on the vinyl examination bed, the squeak of the material loud in the tense room. She didn't dismiss their claims. She took them with the deadly seriousness they deserved. "Let me see," she said, her voice soft but firm. She began her examination. It was thorough, meticulous. She checked his vitals. Heart rate, blood pressure, all normal for a healthy boy. But which boy? A 16-year-old or a 13-year-old? She drew blood, placing a vial into a whirring analysis machine. She took precise measurements of his height and weight, comparing them to his UE admission file. The results came back from the computer. She stared at the screen, her lips pressed into a thin, grim line. His height is 161 centimeters. In his file from a year ago, it was 166. She looked at Tashinori. He's lost 5 centimeters. The number, clinical and cold, hung in the air. 5 centimeters. 2 inches. Gone. Finally, she placed her hands on Izuku's forehead, then his arms. She closed her eyes, her own quirk reaching into him, not to heal, but to read. To sense the state of his biological systems. Her brow furrowed in deep concentration. Izuku felt a faint, familiar warmth, but it felt confused. Like it was probing a system it didn't recognize. When she pulled away, the look on her face was one of profound sadness and defeat. She sank into her chair, looking older than Izuku had ever seen her. "It's true," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "All of it." All Might stopped his pacing, his hands gripping the back of a chair so hard his knuckles were white. "Can you fix it?" he demanded, his voice raw with desperation. "Your quirk, can you reverse it?" Recovery Girl shook her head slowly, her eyes filled with a deep, professional sorrow. "No, Tashinori. I can't." "Why not?" he pressed, his voice cracking. "You can mend shattered bones, regenerate tissue, because what I do is accelerate a natural process," she explained, her gaze fixed on Izuku, who was staring at his own two small hands. "Healing is the body's natural response to injury. My quirk takes that process and speeds it up. But this is not a natural process. It's an unnatural reversal. One for All isn't just damaging him, it's rewriting his biology on a fundamental level. It's consuming his personal timeline as fuel. There is no healing process for me to accelerate. It's like asking a gardener to repair a clock that's running backward. The mechanisms are completely different. My power has nothing to work with." She took a deep breath. "From what I can sense, his cellular makeup, his bone density, his hormonal levels, they are not those of a 16-year-old. They are perfectly healthy, for a boy of about 13 or 14. The diagnosis is chronoregression induced by quirk overuse. The scientific term made it real. It made it a disease. A terminal one." All Might finally broke. He slammed his fist down on the back of the chair, a rattling sound of bone against metal. "I did this," he rasped, his voice thick with self-loathing. "I gave him this power. I told him it was a chance to be a hero. I've poisoned him." "You didn't know, Tashinori," Recovery Girl said gently. "None of the previous users ever reported anything like this. This must be a new mutation, a new development. Perhaps because Izuku's body was a true quirkless vessel, it bonded with the power in a different, more volatile way. Or perhaps..." She trailed off, looking at the boy on the bed. "Perhaps it's because he is the first user in a long time to push the quirk so far beyond its limits so quickly." Izuku didn't say anything. He was listening to them discuss his fate as if he were an abstract problem. His dream of becoming the #1 hero, the driving force of his entire existence, had evaporated. It was a ghost, a phantom limb that he could still feel but could never use again. It was replaced by a new, singular goal, a pale imitation of his former ambition, survival. "So what do we do?" All Might asked, his voice hollow. "What happens now?" Recovery Girl's gaze was unflinching. "The answer is brutally simple. He can't use his quirk. Not ever again. Not even a flicker. Every time he does, he will lose a piece of himself. If he continues to use it, he will regress past childhood, past infancy, and then he will simply cease to exist. He'll be rewound out of the timeline altogether." Cease to exist. The words were a death knell. The end of the path. Izuku squeezed his eyes shut. So this was it. The end of Deku, the hero. He would live out his life as Izuku Midoriya, the boy with the monstrous quirk he could never touch. A quirkless boy, all over again. The irony was a bitter pill to swallow, but All Might, even in his emaciated form, was still All Might. He was the symbol of peace, the man who never gave up. "No," he said, his voice regaining a sliver of its old, steely resolve. "I don't accept that. There is always a way. Every quirk has a counter, a weakness. We fought All for One. We've faced impossible odds. We will not be beaten by this." He looked from Recovery Girl to Izuku, his eyes blazing with a desperate fire. "I don't know how, but I swear on my life as a hero, on the memory of my master, I will find a solution. I will find a cure for you, my boy. No matter what it takes. No matter the cost." His vow was a flicker of light in the crushing darkness. It wasn't a plan. It was barely even a hope. But it was something. It was a promise. They left Recovery Girl's office with a heavy, unspoken understanding. The goal had shifted. The mission had changed. The race to create the next symbol of peace was over. The race to save Izuku Midoriya had just begun. All Might led him to a secluded bench overlooking one of the campus training grounds. They sat in silence for a long time, watching the sun climb higher in the sky. Izuku felt empty. The panic and fear had burned themselves out, leaving behind a cold, hollow ache. He looked down at himself. The blazer sleeves completely covered his hands. His knees were lost somewhere in the cavernous legs of his trousers. He looked like a child playing dress-up in his father's clothes. He looked exactly like what he was, a 14-year-old boy, pretending to be a 16-year-old hero. Toshinori finally turned to him. The burning fire in his eyes had softened into an expression of profound, bottomless regret. He saw not the promising successor, not the wielder of One for All, but a child who he had led into a terrible trap. Slowly, awkwardly, he wrapped his thin arms around Izuku's small shoulders, pulling him into a hug. It was a clumsy embrace, all sharp angles and bone, but it was filled with a desperate, protective warmth. Izuku was so small in his arms. It felt wrong. He should have been broad-shouldered, strong, growing into the vessel he needed to be. Instead, he was shrinking, fading. Izuku finally let go, burying his face in the thin fabric of All Might's tracksuit, and the silent tears he'd been holding back began to flow freely, soaking the material. He cried for his lost dream, for his stolen years, for the terrifying, uncertain future that lay ahead. All Might held him tightly, his own eyes shining with unshed tears. He rested his chin on the top of Izuku's messy green hair, a silent guardian sheltering his charge from a storm he had unwittingly created. "I'm so sorry, my boy," he whispered, his voice thick with an ocean of guilt. "I'm so sorry." The words were an admission, a confession, and a promise. And as the sun rose over the school for heroes, they hung in the air, a testament to a dream that had died at dawn. The meeting was held in the last place anyone would ever think to look, Principal Nise's private office, a room that felt more like a grand library's reading nook than the command center of Japan's premier hero academy. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves overflowed with volumes on philosophy, strategy, and quantum mechanics. A large, ornate chessboard sat on a low table, a game perpetually paused mid-move. The air itself seemed thick with intelligence and secrets. Today, it would hold one more. Izuku sat on a plush armchair that seemed to swallow his diminished frame. He had changed out of his ridiculously oversized uniform into a simple tracksuit, but it did little to hide the truth. He felt like a child sitting at the adult's table, a feeling amplified by the gravity of the three figures arranged before him. Principal Nizu, an enigmatic creature of indeterminable species, sat behind his polished mahogany desk, his paws steepled before him, his black eyes gleaming with an intellect that was both fascinating and deeply unsettling. To his left stood Shota Aizawa, his homeroom teacher, leaning against a bookshelf with his arms crossed. His usual expression of bored apathy was gone, replaced by a tense, focused alertness. His gaze, when it landed on Izuku, was sharp but held a flicker of something that looked unnervingly like concern. And beside him, standing like a gaunt specter, was Toshinori Yagi, All Might, his face a mask of grim determination and barely concealed guilt. Recovery Girl was present via a secure video link on a large monitor, her image crisp and her expression somber. The room was soundproofed, the communications electronically swept. This was a conversation that could never leave these walls. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," Nisa began, his voice a calm, precise tenor that cut through the tension. "As you know, we are here to discuss a matter of utmost urgency and sensitivity regarding young Midoriya." All Might cleared his throat. I will explain." With a heavy heart, for the third time in as many days, the story was told. Toshinori's voice was strained, each word laced with self-recrimination as he detailed Izuku's condition. He explained the chronoregression, Recovery Girl's diagnosis, and the brutal conclusion they had reached, that One for All, the sacred torch, was now a self-consuming fire. Izuku watched Aizawa's face as the story unfolded. His teacher's stoic facade was a masterclass in control, but Izuku, a student of observation, could see the subtle tells. A slight tightening of his jaw when All Might mentioned the muscular fight. A flicker of his eyes toward Izuku's small frame when the 5-centimeter height loss was confirmed. When All Might finally finished, the silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the faint hum of the monitor. Nizu was the first to speak, his gaze fixed on Izuku. "Midoriya-kun," he said, his tone gentle but firm. "You have been carrying this immense burden alone. I am sorry we did not see it sooner. The fault for that lies with us, your mentors." Aizawa pushed himself off the bookshelf. He walked slowly toward Izuku, his dark eyes intense. He crouched down, bringing himself to eye level with his student. This simple act, so out of character for the usually aloof hero, struck Izuku more than anything else. "Midoriya," Aizawa said, his voice low and raspy. "The official story is that you were hit by a delayed action de-aging quirk during the training camp attack. The effects are long-lasting, and the recovery is uncertain. That is what we will tell the other students and faculty. It's a plausible lie, and it will protect you from unnecessary questions." He paused, his gaze unwavering. "But the truth, the one in this room, this changes everything." Izuku nodded, swallowing hard. "I know." "No," Aizawa said, a rare, raw intensity in his voice. "I don't think you do. Your dream, to become the #1 hero, to be the next All Might, as of this moment, that dream is on indefinite hold." The words, though expected, hit Izuku like a physical blow. Hearing it stated so plainly, by the man who had once expelled an entire class for lacking potential, made it devastatingly final. "Effective immediately," Nizu continued, taking over from Aizawa. "You are to be pulled from all frontline combat training. No more practical heroics. No more sparring. You are forbidden from using One for All, under any circumstances. To do so would be an act of self-harm, and we cannot permit it." Despair, cold and sharp, lanced through Izuku. "But what about my license? My future as a hero? I can't just stop. There has to be another way. We are trying to find one." All Might's voice boomed, though it lacked its usual power, sounding more like a desperate plea. "But until we do, your safety is the absolute priority. Your life is the priority." "My life?" Izuku shot back, a surge of desperate frustration making him bold. "What life? Sitting on the sidelines while my friends get stronger? Watching villains on a screen, knowing I have the power to stop them but can't use it? That's not living, that's a prison." The raw emotion in his voice silenced the room. He was a child again, not just in body, but in his helplessness. He was being told the one thing he had fought his entire life to become was now impossible. Aizawa's expression softened, the hard lines around his eyes easing into something that looked almost like sympathy. "Being a hero isn't just about throwing punches, kid. You know that better than anyone. Your mind, your analytical skills, they are a powerful weapon. One that doesn't cost you years of your life." "Aizawa is correct," Nizu interjected smoothly. "Your position at Yuri will be adjusted. You will remain in Class 1A, but your focus will shift. You will work directly with me on strategy, threat analysis, and quirk theory. You will become a strategic asset. A mind behind the front lines, a strategist. An analyst. The same role he'd had when he was quirkless, scribbling in his notebooks. It felt like a regression in more ways than one. He was being sidelined, put on a shelf while the real heroes fought. The despair was so thick he could taste it, metallic and bitter like old blood. He slumped back in the chair, the fight draining out of him, leaving only a hollow ache. He saw the pity in their eyes. All Might's guilt, Aizawa's concern, Nizu's clinical sympathy. He couldn't bear it. He looked away, focusing on the intricate patterns of the Persian rug. It was All Might who broke the heavy silence, his mind clearly racing, searching for any sliver of hope. "The vestiges," he said suddenly, his voice sharp. Nizu and Aizawa turned to him. "The what?" Aizawa asked. "The previous users of One for All," All Might explained, his eyes alight with a new, frantic idea. "Their consciousnesses are imprinted on the quirk's core. I've felt them. Young Midoriya has seen them. They are a part of the power." He looked at Izuku. "This regression, it's a malfunction in the quirk itself. If anyone can understand what's happening, it's them. The ones who lived with it. The ones who are it. Izuku's head snapped up. The vestiges. The shadowy figures he'd seen in his dream during the sports festival. The feeling of their presence, a silent audience to his struggles. He hadn't thought of them as a resource. He'd thought of them as ghosts. How would we even contact them? Recovery Girl asked from the monitor, her voice skeptical but intrigued. It's not like they have a phone number. It happens when the quirk is active, All Might said, thinking aloud. Or during moments of extreme stress or unconsciousness. We need to create a controlled environment, to trigger a connection deliberately. Aizawa's eyes narrowed. Trigger it how? By having him use the quirk? The very thing that's erasing him? That seems counterintuitive. Just a flicker. All Might insisted, his desperation growing. The smallest possible amount. Enough to open the door, to get their attention. It's a risk, I know. But it's the only lead we have. Otherwise, we have nothing. Niza steepled his paws again, his dark eyes fixed on the chessboard as if mapping out 100 different moves. A controlled risk versus a guaranteed, degenerative decline. The logic is sound, if dangerous. He turned his gaze to Izuku. The final decision, however, rests with you, Midoriya-kun. It is your body, your time, that would be spent. We will not force you. All eyes were on him. The choice was his. Accept his fate as a strategist in the attic, watching the world from a window while he slowly faded away, or take a gamble. A terrible, frightening gamble. Pay a small, known price in the hope of finding a way to stop paying it forever. A few more hours of his life, traded for a chance to reclaim all the years he had lost. There was no real choice. I'll do it, Izuku said, his voice quiet but firm. The hollow ache was still there, but now it was joined by a tiny, fragile spark. It wasn't hope, not yet. It was just a possibility, and right now, a possibility was everything. The room they chose was one of the secure interrogation rooms in UA's basement levels. It was stark and windowless, the walls padded with sound-dampening foam. It felt like a sensory deprivation chamber. A single, comfortable recliner sat in the center of the room. A heart monitor and an EEG machine were wheeled in, their wires ready to be attached to him. Recovery Girl was there in person this time, her medical kit open and ready. Aizawa stood by the door, a silent, grim sentinel. All Might knelt beside the recliner, his expression a mixture of hope and terror. Are you ready, my boy? All Might asked, his voice low. Izuku nodded, his heart hammering against his ribs. He was wearing a simple t-shirt and shorts. Recovery Girl attached the cool, sticky pads of the monitors to his chest and temples. The steady beep of the heart monitor filled the small room, a countdown to the experiment. The goal is to connect, not to fight. All Might instructed, his hand resting on Izuku's shoulder. When you feel the power, don't try to channel it into a limb. Just let it exist. Let it fill you, and reach out with your mind. Call to them. Think of them. Nana Shimura. The others. I will be right here with you. Izuku closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He tried to clear his mind, to focus on the task. He thought of the shadowy figures, the weight of their legacy. He reached for the power. He didn't try to summon 5%. Not even 1%. He aimed for something smaller, a homeopathic dose of the power that was killing him. He envisioned not a crackling fire, but a single, glowing ember. He felt the familiar warmth spread through his veins, the precursor to the green lightning. Then came the vertigo. It was instant and nauseating. The cold, sickening lurch of being pulled backward through time. It felt like falling down a flight of stairs in the dark. The steady beep of the heart monitor seemed to warp and stretch, echoing as if from the other end of a long tunnel. He felt a few more grains of sand slip through the hourglass of his life. A few hours, maybe a whole day, gone. Sacrificed. But then, something else happened. The darkness behind his eyelids was no longer empty. It swirled with a thick purple-black fog, shot through with veins of emerald light. It was a space without dimension, without gravity. He was floating, and he was not alone. They were there. 7 figures standing in a loose circle around him. They were indistinct, their forms made of shifting smoke and shadow, their faces obscured. But he could feel their presence, their attention, all focused on him. It was like standing in a room full of ancient, powerful ghosts. "He's here," a voice echoed, not through his ears, but in the center of his mind. It was a man's voice, calm and deep, the ninth child. This voice was different, raspier, older. He tried to speak, but he had no mouth. He tried to reach out, but he had no hands. He was a disembodied consciousness in their world. "Why have you come?" a third voice asked. This one was female, strong and clear, yet tinged with a profound sadness. He focused all his intent, all his fear and desperation, into a single, mental cry for help. "My quirk. One for all, it's hurting me. It's making me younger. It's erasing me." A wave of something washed over him from the figures. It wasn't just surprise. It was a shared ancient shock. A ripple of disturbance through their collective existence. "Erasing?" the female voice repeated, a note of disbelief coloring her tone. "That is not the nature of the power." The figure directly in front of him began to coalesce, the smoke and shadow solidifying. A woman with dark, jaw-length hair and a small mole under her lip. She wore a hero costume that was both practical and somehow elegant. Her eyes were dark, and as they focused on him, they were filled with a deep, sorrowful empathy. "Nana Shimura. All Might's master. Show me," she commanded, her voice gentle but insistent. She reached out a ghostly hand. It wasn't a physical touch, but he felt a connection form, a conduit opening between them. He let his memories flow, the fight with Muscular, the vertigo, the height marks on the wall, the look of horror on All Might's face. He showed her his fear, his despair, his grim calculations. He felt a collective gasp from the vestiges, a silent, psychic recoil. "This is not a mutation," Nana said, her voice now cold with a dawning fury. Her form flickered with anger. "This is not a flaw in the vessel. This is sabotage." Another figure solidified beside her. He was a stern-looking man with long, dark hair tied back, wearing an old-fashioned, high-collared hero costume. He seemed to radiate an aura of grim pragmatism. This was the fourth user, Haikyuji Shinomori. "She is right," the fourth user's voice echoed in Izuku's mind. "One for all stockpiles power. It does not consume its host. This is a foreign agent. A virus woven into the code of the quirk itself." "A virus?" Izuku projected, his mind reeling. "A time eater," Nana specified, her spectral eyes burning with a righteous anger. "A poison pill. Left by him. By All for One." The name landed in the void with the weight of a black hole. All for One. The monster from his nightmare. The dream hadn't been a dream. It had been a warning. A memory. He must have implanted it generations ago, Haikyuji continued, his voice a low rumble. A dormant seed of destruction, waiting for a user powerful enough to push the quirk to its absolute limits. A user who would water the seed with their own raw power, causing it to sprout and devour them from within. He looked at Izuku, a flicker of something akin to pity in his ghostly eyes. "That user ninth is you." The truth was 1,000 times worse than he could have imagined. This wasn't a freak accident of biology. This was a curse. A targeted, malevolent trap laid by the ultimate evil, a final, posthumous victory for All for One, designed to destroy his brother's legacy by making it devour itself. "Young Midoriya! Izuku!" All Might's frantic voice cut through the spectral fog, pulling him back. The world of the vestiges began to fade, the figures of Nana and Haikyuji dissolving back into smoke. "Wait!" Izuku cried out in the void. "Don't go! How do I stop it? Is there a cure?" The connection was fraying, the real world reasserting its hold. The beep of the heart monitor was growing louder, more insistent. Nana's voice came to him one last time, a desperate, fading whisper. "He is a thief of quirks, but we are a lineage. The answer is not within us. It lies outside." Her voice was gone. The darkness dissolved. Izuku's eyes snapped open. He was back in the interrogation room, gasping for air as if he'd just surfaced from a deep dive. The lights seemed blindingly bright. All Might was leaning over him, his face pale with worry. Recovery Girl was checking the readings on the monitors. "He's back," she announced, a note of relief in her voice. Heart rate is elevated but stabilizing. My boy! Did you see them? Did they say anything? All Might asked, his hands gripping Izuku's shoulders. Izuku pushed himself up, his head swimming with the residual vertigo and the horrifying revelation. It's a trap, he gasped, his voice hoarse. All for one. He did this. He put a virus in the quirk, a time eater. It was designed to do this. The color drained from All Might's face. The idea that his nemesis was still hurting people, still trying to destroy his legacy from beyond the grave, was a special kind of hell. But they said more. Izuku continued, his mind racing to grasp the last, faded whispers from the void. Nana, she said the answer wasn't with them. It was outside. He looked at All Might, his eyes wide. What does that mean? He felt a profound, draining exhaustion from the effort, the cost of his brief journey. He had paid the price. But had he gotten anything in return? An answer that was just another riddle. He lay back in the recliner, his mind a whirlwind of ghosts and viruses and cryptic warnings. He had stared into the heart of his own power, and found his greatest enemy looking back. He was cursed, but for the first time since this nightmare began, a new, dangerous emotion began to bloom in the barren wasteland of his despair. Rage, and with it, a sliver of desperate, defiant hope. The world had become a series of subtle humiliations, a slow, grinding erosion of self that was invisible to most, yet achingly real to Izuku. 2 weeks had passed since the terrifying council with the teachers. 2 weeks of living with the official lie, a carefully constructed narrative that felt as ill-fitting as his own clothes. He was 13 now. Or at least, his body was. His mind was a frantic, 16-year-old prisoner, rattling the bars of a cage made of its own regressing flesh and bone. The dissonance was a constant, low-level hum of psychological torment. The morning began, as it always did now, with the mirror. The face that stared back was undeniably his, but it was a photograph from a forgotten album. The sharp angles of his jaw, hard-won through a year of brutal training, had softened into a boyish roundness. The sprinkling of freckles across his nose and cheeks seemed more pronounced, more childlike. His eyes, he felt, were the only things that hadn't changed. They were still the eyes of a 16-year-old who had fought monsters and seen the abyss, but they looked alien and haunted, set in the face of a first-year middle schooler. Then came the uniform. It was a daily surrender. The blazer, once a snug fit that made him feel like a true UA student, now hung from his shoulders, the fabric bunching up near his neck. He had to roll the sleeves of his white dress shirt twice to keep his hands from being swallowed completely. The trousers were the worst. They were held up by a belt cinched to its last possible hole, and the excess fabric pulled around his sneakers, a constant, swishing reminder of the 5 centimeters of height he had lost. He looked like a child who had stolen his older brother's school clothes. The walk to the main building was an exercise in hyper-awareness. He felt the eyes of his classmates on him. They weren't malicious. They were worse. They were filled with a gentle, suffocating pity. The official story had been delivered by Aizawa a week prior, his voice as deadpan and serious as ever as he addressed the class. As you may have noticed, he'd said, his gaze sweeping over the 20 students, Midoriya's condition has changed. During the villain attack on the training camp, he was struck by a quirk. We've had it analyzed. It's a complex, time-delayed regression quirk. It is, for now, causing a gradual de-aging effect on his physical body. A collective gasp had swept the room. Is he going to be okay? Kirishima had asked, his voice tight with concern. The long-term prognosis is unknown, Aizawa had stated, the lie tasting like ash in his mouth, though his face betrayed nothing. His memories and mind are unaffected, but his physical abilities are obviously compromised. For this reason, he is being temporarily reassigned from combat drills. He requires rest and monitoring. The school's top priority is his recovery. Your priority is to treat him with respect and not make this a bigger spectacle than it already is. Understood? The class had murmured their assent, their gazes turning to Izuku. He had felt 20 pairs of eyes on him, each one a pinprick of sympathy that made his skin crawl. He had wanted to shrink, to disappear completely. And the most horrifying part was, he was getting his wish. Now, that pity was a part of his daily life. In the hallways, Ciro or Kaminari would offer to carry his backpack, as if he were a visiting elementary schooler. During lunch, Sato would pile extra food onto his tray, muttering about needing to keep his strength up. They meant well. Every single one of them. And he hated it. He hated the feeling of being treated like fragile glass when his mind was still forged steel. His core group of friends, the ones he called the Deku Squad, were the most difficult. Their concern was a constant, loving presence that only served to highlight the new, unbreachable chasm between them. Midoriya-kun! Ida's voice boomed as Izuku entered the classroom, making him flinch. The class president marched over to his desk, holding a freshly printed and laminated sheet of paper. I have taken the liberty of drafting an optimized recovery itinerary for you. It balances nutritional intake, mandated rest periods, and low-impact academic exercises to stimulate cognitive function without inducing physical stress. Izuku took the paper. It was a dizzying grid of colored blocks, with timings down to the second. 8 hours and 15 minutes. Consume vitamin C supplement. 12 hours and 30 minutes. Post-lunch mandated 15-minute rest period, ocular focus optional. 19 hours and 45 minutes. Gentle stretching, level 1. Approved exercises only. Thanks, Ida-kun. Izuku mumbled, forcing a smile that felt like a painful grimace. That's really thoughtful. Of course. Ida chopped the air with his hand. As your friend and class president, your swift and logical recovery is my utmost concern. We will get through this setback with structure and discipline. Ida saw a problem, a setback, that could be solved with rules and schedules. He couldn't possibly understand that Izuku's problem defied all logic. The gesture, born of such pure, earnest friendship, only made Izuku feel more isolated, more like a broken project that needed managing. Uraraka was different. Her concern was quieter, more intuitive, and in some ways more painful. She didn't offer schedules or advice. She just watched him. He would catch her gaze from across the common room, her big, brown eyes filled with a sad, helpless worry. She saw not just the physical change, but the dimming of the light within him. He had become withdrawn, melancholic. He no longer joined their group study sessions with his usual frantic energy, his contributions now quiet and subdued. He couldn't train with them, couldn't spar, couldn't even join them for a jog without feeling the burn of his own inadequacy. The distance between them grew with every passing day, a silent, expanding gulf. He was on one side, shrinking, while they were on the other, growing stronger, faster, becoming the heroes he could no longer be. One evening, the quiet humiliation became unbearable. He was in his room, trying to study, but the way his trousers kept catching on his heels was driving him mad. Frustrated, he stood up, the baggy material slumping around his shoes. It was a tangible sign of his decay. He couldn't stand it another second. With a deep breath, he left his room and walked to the girls' side of the dormitory, his heart pounding with a mixture of embarrassment and necessity. He knocked gently on Uraraka's door. She opened it a moment later, a surprised look on her face. Deku-kun? Is everything okay? He couldn't meet her eyes. He held up a pair of his uniform trousers, the ones he was supposed to wear tomorrow. Uraraka-san. I have a weird favor to ask. His voice was barely a whisper. You're good at fixing things. I was wondering, could you help me hem these? They're too long. The request hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. It was more than just a request for tailoring. It was an admission of defeat. A confession of his own diminishment. Uraraka's expression softened, the surprise melting away into a wave of profound, heart-wrenching sympathy. She didn't mock him or act surprised. She just nodded, her eyes gentle. Of course, she said softly. Come in. Her room was warm and tidy, with soft colors and a faint, sweet scent. It felt a world away from his own all-might-themed cell. She had him stand on a small stool while she knelt before him with a sewing kit, pins held between her lips. The scene was so domestic, so normal, yet it felt like the most surreal moment of his life. She carefully folded the cuff of the trousers up to his ankle, her fingers brushing against his leg. The touch was light, professional, but it sent a jolt through him. He felt his cheeks burn with a hot flush of shame. Here was the girl he had a crush on, the girl he had saved and who had saved him in turn, now on her knees, pinning his trousers because he was physically regressing out of existence. Is this okay? She asked, her voice slightly muffled by the pins. She looked up at him, her face full of concentration. Why yeah, he stammered. That's perfect. Thank you, Uraraka-san. Really? They were quiet for a long moment as she worked, the only sounds the rustle of fabric and the faint click of the pins. It was an intimate silence, filled with everything they couldn't say. He knew she wanted to ask more, to ask if he was okay, to ask what was really happening. But she respected Aizawa's warning, respected his privacy, and her restraint was a kindness that almost broke him. I'm sorry, he whispered, the words escaping before he could stop them. She paused, looking up at him again, her brow furrowed. Sorry for what? Deku-kun, you have nothing to be sorry for. A villain did this to you. He just shook his head, looking away. No, a hero did this to me. I did this to myself. She finished her work, standing up and dusting off her knees. There, she said, her voice a little too bright. Good as new. Just be careful when you take them off, the pins are sharp. I will, he said, his voice thick. Thank you? I owe you one. Don't be silly, she said, giving him a small, wobbly smile. That's what friends are for. He took the trousers and retreated back to his room, the interaction leaving him feeling raw and exposed. Uraraka's kindness was a beautiful, painful thing. It was a reminder of the life, the friendships, he was slowly being forced to leave behind. He was a 16-year-old mind trapped in a 13-year-old's body, watching his friends surpass him, his peers outgrow him. He was becoming a child again, and they were all forced to be his unwilling babysitters. The isolation was a physical ache in his chest, a cold, heavy stone that was sinking him deeper into despair. While his closest friends struggled with how to show their support, two others watched from a distance, their methods of analysis as different as fire and ice. Todoroki Shoto was a silent observer. He had spent his entire life navigating a minefield of secrets, lies, and unspoken truths. He was fluent in the language of subtext and evasion. The official story about a villain's quirk pinged every one of his internal alarms. It was too neat, and yet too vague. He watched Izuku during lunch. He saw how Izuku now had to tilt his head back further to speak to Ida. He saw the way Izuku's hand, when it rested next to his own on the table, looked smaller, the knuckles less prominent. He saw the weariness in his friend's eyes, a soul-deep exhaustion that had nothing to do with physical fatigue. He cross-referenced the story with what he knew. Deijin quirks, like Aries had been in its uncontrolled state, were typically rapid and total, or they wore off. This slow, steady, progressive regression was unheard of. Furthermore, it had begun after the camp, not during. He had seen Midoriya in the aftermath of the muscular fight. He'd been shattered, yes, but he had been himself. The shrinking had started later. Todoroki didn't pry. He didn't ask questions. He just watched, collected data, and waited. He knew the truth was something far more complex and terrible than a simple villain attack. He saw the way All Might's gaze lingered on Midoriya, filled with an almost unbearable guilt. He saw the way Aizawa's vigilance around Midoriya had increased tenfold. This wasn't just about protecting a student. This was about containing a secret. A secret that revolved around Midoriya, All Might, and the incredible, devastating power they shared. And then there was Bakugo. If Todoroki was a silent detective, Katsuki Bakugo was a prosecuting attorney. He didn't just suspect the lie, he was actively, furiously trying to dismantle it. His initial confrontation had been born of angry disbelief. But in the weeks since, that anger had curdled into something else, something colder and more intense. He watched Deku with a hawk's predatory focus. He saw the pathetic way the uniform hung on his shrinking frame. He saw the other extras coddling him, treating him like a porcelain doll. And it infuriated him, not because Deku was getting attention, but because it was all based on a lie. He knew, with a certainty that burned in his gut, that this had nothing to do with some random villain. This was about one for all. He saw the hollowness in Deku's eyes and recognized it. It was the look of someone whose weapon had been taken away. For Bakugo, whose entire identity was built on his own overwhelming power, there could be no greater hell. He saw his rival, the one person he had finally, grudgingly acknowledged as a true obstacle, being systematically dismantled, and it offended him on a primal level. This wasn't how their story was supposed to go. He was supposed to surpass Deku in a blaze of glory, not watch him fizzle out like a damp firework. The breaking point came during a strategy session. Since Izuku was benched, Niza had given him a new role. He now sat in a secondary observation room during combat training, a bank of monitors in front of him, a headset connecting him to Niza and Aizawa. His job was to provide real-time tactical analysis. Today, Class 1A was running a complex hostage rescue scenario against the Big Three. It was a slaughter. Mirio's permeation was unstoppable, Tamaki's manifest was wildly unpredictable, and Nijire's shockwaves kept them constantly off balance. Izuku watched, his mind racing. Bakugo's team is too focused on a frontal assault, he said into the headset, his voice calm and clinical. Mirio will just phase through and take them out from behind. They need to use Ishido's acid to create a hazardous zone to restrict his movement, funneling him toward Todoroki, who can try to trap him in ice. An excellent analysis, Midoriya-kun. Niza's voice chirped in his ear, but his advice came too late. On the screen, Mirio phased up through the floor, a disarming grin on his face, and took out Bakugo's entire team in under 10 seconds with a series of gentle, incapacitating taps. Bakugo slammed his gauntlet into the ground in frustration, letting out a roar of pure rage. Later that day, Izuku was walking back from the main building, his mind still replaying the failed simulation, wondering what he could have seen sooner. He was so lost in thought that he didn't hear the footsteps behind him until a hand clamped down on his shoulder, spinning him around. He was shoved, not with bone-breaking force but with an irresistible momentum, into a shadowed alcove between two of the training gym buildings. Bakugo stood before him, blocking the light, his red eyes burning with an intensity that went far beyond his usual anger. We need to talk, Deku, he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. Keikaken, Izuku stammered, his heart leaping into his throat. If this is about the simulation, I tried to warn. I don't give a damn about the simulation. Bakugo snarled, taking a step closer. The sheer force of his presence made Izuku take an involuntary step back, his back hitting the cold concrete wall. I'm done with the games. I'm done with the whispers and the pity party and that bullshit story Aizawa fed us. His eyes raked over Izuku's form, a look of undisguised contempt on his face. A villain's quirk? You think I'm as stupid as the rest of these idiots? I saw you after the camp. You were broken, but you were you. This shrinking act, it started after. It gets worse every damn day. Izuku opened his mouth to protest, to recite the official lie, but Bakugo cut him off. Don't, he warned, pointing a finger in his face. Don't you dare lie to me. I've known you since we were in diapers. I've watched every stupid, pathetic phase of your life. I know what you're supposed to look like. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. And this ain't it. The air crackled with tension. This wasn't the explosive, arrogant Bakugo. This was someone far more terrifying. This was a Bakugo who was thinking, analyzing, and who had already reached his own conclusion. It's about one for all, isn't it? The words hit Izuku with the force of a physical blow. He flinched, his eyes widening in panic. Bakugo saw it, and a look of grim, terrible triumph crossed his face. He hadn't been guessing. He knew. I knew it, he breathed, a humorless smirk twisting his lips. That power All Might gave you. The power you were never meant to have. It's a borrowed flame, and the price is higher than a few broken bones, isn't it? He gestured dismissively at Izuku's body. What is it doing to you? Is it rejecting you? Eating you? Are you too weak a vessel to contain it? Each question was a dagger, twisting in a wound Izuku was desperately trying to hide. He couldn't speak. His throat was tight with unshed tears and terror. He could only stare at Bakugo, his carefully constructed walls crumbling into dust under the force of his rival's assault. Look at me! Bakugo roared, slamming his hand against the wall next to Izuku's head. The concrete shuddered. Stop hiding like a damn coward! I'm the only one who knows the truth about your power. I'm the only one who sees what's really happening. So you are going to stop treating me like an idiot, and you are going to tell me what the hell is going on." The raw, furious intensity in Bakugo's eyes held more than just anger. There was a desperate frustration there, a twisted kind of concern that could only come from a lifetime of tangled history. He wasn't just angry at the weakness. He was furious at the cause of the weakness, at the injustice of a power that would steal its user's strength. Izuku's resolve shattered. He couldn't maintain the lie. Not to Kaken. Not to the one person who, in his own violent, twisted way, had always seen him for exactly what he was. He couldn't form the words. The truth was too monstrous to speak aloud. So he just stood there, pressed against the wall, as his shoulders began to shake. The tears he had been holding back for weeks finally spilled over, silent tracks cutting paths down his boyish cheeks. He squeezed his eyes shut, a gesture of complete and utter surrender. His silence was a confession. It was a scream that echoed in the small, shadowed space between them. Bakugo's breathing hitched. The fury in his eyes flickered, replaced by a dawning, horrified understanding. He had been right. And the truth was even worse than he had imagined. He stared at the pathetic, crying, shrinking boy in front of him, and for the first time in a long time, Katsuki Bakugo was utterly speechless. He had demanded the truth, and now he had it. And it was a terrifying, impossible burden.